Chapter 13. Mr. Jean woke us by beating on the door just after daybreak. I reached to my feet and grabbed my uniform, which I'd balled up under the covers, and jumped down. Kit came over and stood in front of me. "We've got showers now," he said. "I already took one yesterday. We have to take them every morning." "Okay," I said, "I don't mind." I stripped down like all the other boys and followed Kit in the shower room. I waited in line until it was my turn to walk under the water. It was warm this time, and I let it run over me. Kit stepped under the shower beside me and tapped me on the shoulder. He pointed to the soap. "Rub that on you," he said. I took the soap and rubbed it on my arms and chest like Kit. Then I closed my eyes and let it rinse off me. "Hurry up," somebody behind me said. Kit tapped me on the shoulder again and I opened my eyes. "Come on," he said. "The breakfast bell's gonna ring soon." We wrapped ourselves in towels and returned to our bunks. I grabbed my uniform off the floor where I'd left it. "We've got lockers, you know," Kit said. "I know, I put some books in there." "You're supposed to keep your clothes in it, too." "I don't care. I'm not going to be here long enough to need a place to put clothes." "Can I come with you?" "I don't care who comes." "Where are you going?" "Alaska." Kit's eyes grew wide. "Man!" I zipped up my uniform and sat on the edge of the bottom bunk. "Gonna find more people that don't like the government." "Are there lots of them up there?" "That's what Pap said." "Why do you hate the government?" I thought for a second. "Because they never gave me anything," I said, "and they think we owe 'em something." "Sounds like it would be fun to live on your own." "Then you should come with me." "How are we going to get out of here?" "I don't know yet. Where's Mr. Carter?" "He comes at lunch and leaves at midnight." "Good, I think he might be able to outrun me." Jean, Mr. Jean here the rest of the time? "He lives here. His house is connected to the back of the building." Mr. Jean walked into the room again and crossed the floor. He opened the door to the play yard, and Hal came in. His clothes were dusty, and his hair was cowlicked over to the side. He glared at me as he walked to his bunk. "You're in for it now," Kit said. Mr. Jean watched Hale. "We don't want any more trouble out of you, Hale, you hear?" Hale didn't answer. "Hale, don't make us punish you again." "I hear you," Hale said. Mr. Jean shook his head, and walked out of the room. Hale spun around and looked at me. "I'm going to get my chance at you," he whispered. "All right," I said. Hale glared at me for a second longer and then headed for the showers. I stood and followed Kit to the dining room. We sat next to each other and ate a breakfast of eggs, bacon, grits, toast, and orange juice. "They always have food this good?" "Most people don't think it's so good." "I think it's the best I've ever had, better than jail." "Don't eat too much again." "I'm trying not to, but it's hard. I've never had people cooking me all I could eat." Mr. Broomstead walked up to our table and gave Kit a small cup with a white tablet in it. Kit dumped the pill in his tongue and washed it down with water. "What is that?" "My medicine." "How often do you take it?" "Every day." "What does it do to you?" "It helps me stay well." "I don't need it much longer," he shrugged, then asked, "What trailer are you in for class?" "Number 2. "Me too." "Are they going to make you cut your hair?" I nodded with my mouth full. "How'd you cut it when you lived in the forest?" I chewed fast and swallowed. Pap jammed his hat down over my head and burned around the edges with a candle. "Hurt?" "No, but it stunk real bad." You didn't have scissors?" "Yeah, we had scissors. We had most everything you'd need to cut and sew things. Sometimes he cut my hair with scissors when it got too thick." "You know how to sew?" "I can make some beaver breeches that'll keep rain and stickers off. I made my own deerskin hat. I've always wanted a coonskin hat. Is it like that?" "Yep, tail and all. Soon as I get out of here, I'll get a deer and make you and me one." Kit smiled. I could tell he was thinking about the deerskin hat. I caught myself eating too fast again and set my fork down. I heard laughing and looked up to see Hale coming into the dining hall. His hair was wet and he smiled like he didn't care that he'd gotten into trouble. He didn't look at me. He sat down with another group of boys across the room. "What did he do to get in here?" I asked Kit. "Most people didn't do anything. Most of us just don't have parents. I think Hale's got parents. They just they but they won't let him stay with them." "The government?" "Yes." "How come?" "I don't know." "What about you?" I asked. "I didn't ever know my parents." "You lived here your whole life?" "No, I've lived lots of places," he said. "I saw on the news that your daddy died. What about your mama?" She died when I was little. I don't hardly remember her. Sometimes yellow finches remind me of her. Kit thought about that for a moment, then went back to his breakfast. Before long, Mr. Dean told us to go to our lockers and get our things for school. I said goodbye to Kit and headed for the kitchen. Not far from the serving slot was a door of the same thick wire that made up the rest of the kitchen wall. I walked through the door and saw Mrs. Broomstead making a list at a small table in the back of the kitchen. When she saw me, she stood up and pointed to the direction I'd come from. Nobody steps in this kitchen without me knowing about it first, she said. Mr. Dean told, get back out there and wait until I call for you, she snapped. I did what she said and returned to the dining hall. In a few minutes, she appeared again and motioned for me to follow her through the kitchen. We ended up in a small room with no windows and boxes of food stacked against the wall. At the opposite end of the room was a steel door with no alarm signs. Mrs. Broomstead grabbed a middle chair and set it out for me. She motioned for me to sit, then got beside me and pulled scissors from her apron pocket. You're that boy that lived in the forest, aren't you? Yes, ma'am. They say you're mean. I'm not mean. That's good. You sit still and stay that way. Okay. I had never seen such hair, she said. Me and Pap wear it long in the winter to keep warm. We wear it short in the summer so bugs don't get in it, and so we keep cool. She got behind me and felt her fingers move through my hair and gather it. Better not be bugs in there now, she said. There's nothing living in there. I heard the scissors snipping and felt my hair getting tugged. Mrs. Broomstead smelled like something in Mr. Abrascado's store. I was trying to figure out what it was when the steel door opened from the outside and a man entered the room carrying a box. Where you want it? He asked. Mrs. Broomstead put the scissors back in her pocket and showed the man a place to put the box. You do haircuts too? He asked her. She frowned. Seems like I do most everything around here. What else have you got for me? Milk, eggs, flour, cheese, peanut butter. We've got some boxes of mashed potatoes we'll bring later. Mrs. Broomstead waved her hands in the air. Just put it wherever and I'll arrange it all later on. I've got too much to do right now. Yes, ma'am. Don't forget to pull that door shut when you leave. The man continued to bring boxes of supplies through the door while Mrs. Broomstead finished my haircut. When she was done, she brushed her palms against her sides and told me to put my chair against the wall, get my books and jacket from my locker, and get to my classroom trailer. On the way back, I rubbed my hand over my new haircut and buzzed with excitement. Short hair was fine with me. I just discovered a piece of my escape plan. Chapter 14. I was 15 minutes late for class when I walked into the trailer. There were 8 boys in the 10 and 11-year-old group, and they laughed when I came in. I felt my new haircut and smiled back at them. Mrs. Crutcher stood at the front of the room before the chalkboard and waited for me to find a chair. She was young and pretty, with her hair pulled into a ponytail. Everyone get quiet, she said. This is our new student, Moon Blake. They all know me, I said. Very well, Moon. I'm Mrs. Crutcher. Why don't you go ahead and sit down and tell us about yourself? I sat in the chair and put my books on top of the desk. Everyone was staring at me, and I felt jittery. What do you want to know? Where are you from? Everybody started laughing again until Mrs. Crutcher held up her hand for them to be quiet. The forest, I said. She got a surprised look in her face. The forest? Yes, ma'am. Let's Don't be silly, Moon. He's from the forest, Kit said. He's the one on TV. Mrs. Crutcher put her hands on her hips and narrowed her eyes at me. They sure did clean you up, she said. Took 3 showers, got my hair cut by Mrs. Broomstead. Mrs. Crutcher walked to my desk and looked down at my school books. When was the last time you attended school? She asked suspiciously. This is my first time. The other kids began laughing again as Mrs. Crutcher's eyes grew wide. She turned in a circle with her finger to her lips, and they grew quiet. Well, she continued, we've got our work cut out for us. Do you know how to read? I nodded. Read to myself and write, and I know most anything you can ask me about animals. Pap said he taught me more than I'd get at school. Very well. Why don't you help us out by turning your reader to page 67 and read the first page to us? Okay, I said. I opened the book to page 67. Do you mind reading out loud from the front of the room? I don't mind reading from anywhere. Went to the stand before the chalkboard and read about a boy and his yellow dog. I enjoyed the story and smiled as I read it. When I was done, Mrs. Crutcher nodded. That was very nice, Moon. Pap said people have to know how to read and write. How are you arithmetic skills? Not good. Pap said he didn't know a lick about math. I can add and subtract, but I don't know division or multiply tables. We'll have to work on that then. Might not want to waste your time on me. I'm going to be out of here before long. My class laughed again. I see, Mrs. Crutcher said. I could tell she didn't believe me. Well, for now, Mr. Moon, Blake, why don't you return to your seat and try to focus on learning some things in here? I shrugged and went back to my desk. The other students took turns standing in front of the chalkboard and reading from the story What the Boy and His Yellow Dog. I put my chin on my desk and listened. When reading period was over, we worked on our arithmetic books. Mrs. Crutcher told me to follow along as best I could. She scribbled multiplication to problems on the backboard, and I thought they made no more sense than turkey scratch. After a while, It began to rain outside. Mrs. Broomstead brought in a box of sandwiches and drinks so that we could have lunch in the classroom and didn't have to get wet and track mud in her dining hall. We sat on the floor in a circle, and the boys wanted me to tell them about living in the forest. Mrs. Crutcher sat at her desk and watched us. She seemed tired, but every once in a while she smiled at me. When Mrs. Crutcher dismissed us that afternoon, the rain had stopped and the play yard dripped under gray skies. We were the first trailer to be let out, so Kit and I stood under the tree and waited for the rest of the boys. After a minute, Kit told me he needed to use the restroom and left me alone. He wasn't gone long before the door to the 12th and 13-year-old door opened and I saw Hale come down the steps into the yard. He saw me immediately and began walking towards me, with some of the other boys following. My eyes searched for a stick, but there was none nearby. Hale was walking faster and he seemed to have something in mind for me. I stood up and got into my fighting stance. He never stopped walking, but stomped right up to me and swung his fist. I ducked and felt his hand lift the hair on my head. While I was crouching down, hit him as hard as I could in the crotch. When I covered my face with my hands and started rolling across the ground. When I looked up, I could see the other boys standing around Hale. He was lying on his side and moaning. Kit came running and grabbed my arm to help me. I stood and brushed off my pants and pulled the pine needles from my hair. You better get up, Hale, I heard someone say. Here comes Mr. Carter. But he didn't get up. Mr. Carter broke through the crowd. Hale was still moaning and holding his crotch. Mr. Carter watched him for a second and then turned to me. What'd you do to him? I knocked him in the balls about as hard as I could. Mr. Carter shook his head. Hale, I think you'd learn to leave this fellow alone by now. You'll lay there as long as you like. You'll be out here until tomorrow morning. Hale moaned and a few of the other kids started laughing. I looked at Kit and he was smiling at me. How'd you do that? I just hit him real good. He curled up like that all on his own.